The House Judiciary and Oversight Committee is holding a markup of a resolution to hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress this morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Republicans are releasing a report this week charging the first son with violating federal law after he defied a congressional subpoena last month. Hunter Biden offered to only testify publicly. This just one legal headache for Hunter Biden after another. He will also be arraigned in a California court tomorrow on tax charges. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer joined me in the last hour saying that they are investigating whether President Biden was involved in Hunter's decision to defy that subpoena.
We're requesting the communication where Joe Biden used pseudonyms. We found out that's where Joe Biden was communicating with all of these characters in these business schemes. So we've still requested that. They haven't turned over hardly anything. I think they turned over about 14% of those pseudonym emails. Those are certainly areas of specific interest for this committee. Any types of communication, whether they were in Joe Biden's name or whether Joe Biden was using a fake email to communicate with both his son and all of these characters in these shady business schemes.
Joining me right now is Ohio Congressman, Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
You bet. Good to be with you.
Can you walk us through what happens this morning with this contempt of Congress charge?
Yeah, there's a report that actually functions like a bill. You will mark it up. There can be amendments offered. There'll be debate. I assume it'll be a pretty robust debate there in the committee. But, Maria, I don't know if you've ever had a more blatant, more brazen contempt of Congress than this. I mean, he was supposed to testify on December 13th at 9:30 in the committee room in a deposition format. And he said, no, I'm not coming. And yet he comes to the Capitol just a few hundred yards away from where we're having this, and he does a press conference. And it was interesting. At the press conference, he said, I'm here to answer all questions. I'll do it publicly. I'm just not going to sit down in a deposition. And then he finished with that statement in his press event, and he turned and walked away and didn't take any questions from the press. So this is a pretty blatant brazen. And what we would ask him, we would have asked him questions like, who is the big guy? Is the big guy the person we all think he is, that we all know it is? What actually happened on that phone call when the executives from the Ukrainian energy company asked you to weigh in with D.C. and relieve them of the pressure, and then you called your dad? What did you say on that phone call? What did you convey to him? Because we know 3 days later he went to Ukraine and conditioned the release of American tax dollars to Ukraine on the firing of the very prosecutor who was applying the pressure to the company that Hunter Biden sat on the board of, Burisma, this Ukrainian energy company. Those are some of the questions. Here's a fundamental question. What was the business you guys were in? Your associate, Devin Archer, your business partner, said the business was selling access to the brand, and the brand was Joe Biden. So those are all kinds of questions we would have had, but we did get a chance to ask him because he didn't show up. Instead, he did a press conference.
Yeah, I mean, look, your colleague, James Comer, with me in the last hour, said the same thing. What exactly were they selling? But look, when you're talking about this defying of a subpoena, Hunter Biden couldn't do that alone, right? He had to get the space on the Senate side to create an opportunity to do a press conference, to stick it in your eye, to say, I'm here, but I'm not going to where you want me to go.
Yep.
Eric Swalwell set up that for him on the Senate side so that he could help. Is Eric Swalwell also complicit here? Does he have some answers to give us, given the fact that he, too, helped Hunter Biden, I guess, defy that subpoena?
Well, Professor Turley has written a whole column on that issue. And then, of course, you have the issue of the White House. What did they know? Karine Jean-Pierre has said that President Biden was on notice, at least, of what Hunter Biden was going to do and how he was going to respond to the subpoena from the House of Representatives. So I think that's something that, as in the first hour, Mr. Comer, Chairman Comer, pointed out that, you know, what involvement, what knowledge, what real knowledge, what information did the White House have about all this, and how if they were involved in what way or in any way. I think that's a fair question as well. So those are some things that I think you'll see the Congress begin to look at. These
are all legitimate questions, Congressman, and I guess what I want to know is the influence peddling still going on? I mean, you've talked so much, as has James Comer, about potential bribery, influence peddling, potential money laundering. We know that Hunter Biden is selling his art and not telling us who he's selling it to. The art dealer testified before the House Oversight Committee yesterday. The gallerist, George Burge, told lawmakers that he never spoke with anybody at the White House about any agreement to keep Hunter's art buyers confidential. But Biden officials claim that they do, in fact, have an agreement with the dealer to avoid ethics issues that nobody could know who's buying the art. The gallerist also said that Hunter knew the identities of 70% of the people who bought the art, including Kevin Morris, who bought most of it, by the way. Hunter cut Morris a sweetheart deal by charging him 40% of the art, which was actually valued, he claims, at $875,000. Burge has admitted he had never done an art deal like this before. Congressman, do you believe selling this art to people that they're not telling us who's buying the art could, in fact, also come under the umbrella of influence peddling?
Well, we do know that 70% of the art that was purchased by Democrat donors, a handful of Democrat donors. And the key one, of course, was Kevin Morris, who we will be deposing next week. He bought $875,000 worth of 11 different paintings or 11 different pieces of art that he purchased. $1.5 million. Hunter Biden, brand new artist, in 2.5 years' time, sells $1.5 million worth of art. Now, maybe he's that good. I don't know. I'm no art critic. But what I do know is 875 of that 1.5 million was from this one Democrat donor, this one individual who's done all kinds of things for Hunter Biden. In addition to buying $875,000 worth of art, this guy also paid $1.2 million of Hunter's back taxes. He's also given Hunter Biden other money. I think the LA Times said it was a total $5 million that this guy has given to Hunter Biden. So this is someone that we'll be talking to next week in a deposition as part of our impeachment inquiry. And
James Comer just told us a moment ago that Kevin Morris blew off, his question to come and talk. And in fact, he was right there behind Hunter Biden. I want to switch gears and get your take on Fulton County Prosecutor Nathan Wade. He was hired by Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis to investigate former President Trump. That Trump met with Biden White House twice last year. We're learning now that Willis and Wade are allegedly in a romantic relationship, an affair. The two benefiting financially from this case, using law firm funds to take vacations together. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn writes this on X. Fani Willis' alleged romantic partner, special prosecutor, coordinated with the White House while building the political prosecution of Donald Trump, all on the taxpayer dime. We're also learning a top prosecutor on special counsel Jack Smith's team discouraged the FBI from investigating the Clinton Foundation back in 2016. A lot is coming out here, Mr. Chairman, about the people who are trying to take Donald Trump down. Can you assess this?
Yeah, well, we're particularly interested in this idea that this news that just broke yesterday that looks like Nathan Wade was at the White House working on this case and doing so on Fani Willis's dime. What kind of coordination was going on there? Were they talking to the White House counsel? Who were they talking to? So we want to investigate that to see if that actually happened, and if so, who in fact was he talking to in the White House, and was it about this case, this ridiculous case by Fani Willis against President Trump and a bunch of other folks there in Georgia. So this is something we're looking at. The news broke 2 nights ago about the romantic relationship supposedly that's going on there, and that he was hired by Fani Willis. And then this news yesterday about Mr. Wade being at the White House. We want to check all that out, but we're looking at that, and our lawyers are on the committee are investigating.
So what is your assessment of what's happening with Trump right now, Congressman? I mean, you've got all of these indictments. He's back and forth. They want him in court. Special counsel Jack Smith wants him on trial right before Super Tuesday as the former president waits for the Supreme Court to weigh in.
Donald Trump came to this town and shook it up and did what he told the American people he was going to do, and this town doesn't like that. They don't like individuals who do what they say they're going to do, who get things done for the American people, and they've been out to get him even before he got here. They spied on his campaign. Then it was the Mueller investigation. Then it was the impeachment. Then they raid his home. Then they indict him in Manhattan with Alvin Bragg and Fani Willis in Georgia, Jack Smith in Miami and D.C., and then, of course, it's the 14th Amendment nonsense that they're trying in Colorado and Maine. They will never stop because this is one individual who actually comes to this town and fights for the country, fights for the American people. And that's what this town cannot, it's so against him. So they just continue to do this.
Yeah.
But the country sees through it, and that's why he's over 50% in the Iowa caucus, and I think going to win big on Monday night.
So a final question here. You've got a lot on your plate in terms of the judiciary business. You've got a potential impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, a potential impeachment of Joe Biden, certainly an inquiry underway, and of course all of these depositions. How does this play out?
We'll just keep doing our work. We have a constitutional duty to do oversight. We're going to do that. We're going to get the facts. And then we think the impeachment inquiry, we need to talk to Kevin Morris, who's happening next week. We need to talk to Eric Schwerin, Rob Walker, Jim Biden, Tony Bobolinsky, all under oath in a deposition format, get that information, and then make a decision. Do we file articles of impeachment against the President of the United States? I think right now the evidence is pretty darn compelling, but that'll be a decision we will make once we get all the evidence and do all the interviews. We think all that's going to take place in the next 4 or 5 weeks is our goal, to get these interviews done, these depositions done in January. A few may trickle into February, but once we get that done, then we make a decision, and then it'll be up to Speaker Johnson, Leader Scalise on when, if we move forward with actual articles, when that would take place.
All right, Congressman, we'll be watching all of that. It's just extraordinary to me that we are not seeing all of these stories and this news on the mainstream media, given what you have exposed, all of these millions of dollars that Joe Biden and his family, as you say, have taken in. It's quite extraordinary.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you,
Take
sir.
care.
Jim Jordan in D.C. We'll be right back.